All right, Rabbi say good morning, or good tevach. We are beginning in Yahrzeit Hashem a brand new, beautiful week of TALMUD together. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors. To thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Adar. Sorry, just had it up before. To thank Teri Czinn for dedicating all of his Sherman Drushos this month in loving memory of Teri's father, Dr. Kahn, Tzvi Hirsh, ben Yosef HaKohen. To thank Paul and Kathy Pollack for dedicating all of the Shiurim and Drushos this month in memory of Paul's grandparents, Zechariah ben Zechariah and Dinah bas Dov. To thank our week of learning sponsors, an anonymous sponsor of the Eloi nishmas, Moshe Aharon Alter, ben Yosef Binyamin on the occasion of his first yartzeit, and the Eloi nishmas, Sara Deena bas Elimelech. We hope to the merit of our TALMUD Torah, all of the Neshama Slav and Aliyah, the families in Nechama, and with that, let us begin. So today's daf is Lamed Dalet 34. Does it sound okay? Microphone? Yeah, good. No, good. Good. So I'll say 34. We are picking up Meretz Hashem at the Mishnah on Lamed Dalid Amud Aleph. The Mishnah says as follows: similar to the previous cases that we had before, Ra as Hakoy. Person sees a kai. Now, I will say we've spoken about kai before. Specifically, those who were with us for the last cycle in Masechus Chulin, we spoke a lot about a kai because a kai is an animal where there is a machlokes if it is a behema or a chayo. Now, you might ask yourself, what does that matter? So, remember again, the major distinction is for the mitzvah of kisvei hadam. Whether or not after shchita there is an obligation to go ahead and cover the blood of the animal. For a behemah, there is no din of kisvei hadam. For a chaya, there is a din of kisvei hadam. There are other ramifications as well, but the Mishnah says as follows: Ra esakai. So here is the case. A person goes ahead and a person sees a kai, and goes ahead and says, "Amar harini nazir." Person says, "I'm a nazir." Right? Harini nazir shezeh chaya. I'm a nazir that this kai is considered to be a chaya. Harini. That's guy number one. Guy number two, harini nazir shezeh eino chaya. Guy number two says, "I'll be a nazir that it's not a chaya." Guy number three, harini nazir shezeh behema. I'm a nazir that it's a behema. Guy number four, harini nazir she'ein zeh behema. I'm a nazir that's not a behema. Guy number five, harini nazir shezeh chaya ubehema. Right? I'm a nazir in the condition that it's a chaya and a behema. Number six, harini nazir she'ein zeh lo chaya v'lo behema. Right? I'm going to be a nazir in the condition that it's not a chaya, not a behema. That's the harini nazir she'echad mikem nazir. I'll be a nazir that one of you guys before me is a nazir. Last guy, harini nazir she'ein echad mikem nazir. I'll be a nazir if none of you guys are nazir. Last guy, harini nazir shekulchem nazirim. I'll be a nazir if all of you are nazir. We'll say, so what is the halacha? What is the status of all these individuals? Kulan nazirim. They're all considered to be nazirim. So halacha so all considered to be nazirim. Now I will say, now interestingly enough, if you look at the Rush, so Moshe pointed out to me that my Rush pagination may not be the same as other people's Rush pagination, although why did no one tell me this for the first 34 blot of the Masechta? Sitting here like an idiot saying, look at 4 lines, all right, whatever. So I'm not sure exactly what to do about that, but at least in my pagination of the Rush, if you look 6 lines up from before the Rush gets wide, in the left-hand margin of the Rush. So the Rush asks a simple question. I will say, when you look at this Mishnah, what's the point of the Mishnah? The Mishnah seems to be saying it's the same machlokes Hashem Beis Hillel that we had before, which seems to be a general machlokes of hektish bitos, habi hektish or lo habi hektish. So we already discussed the idea. Beis Shammai holds that hektish bitos have hektish. So that seems to be what this Mishnah is saying. So it's a little bit anticlimactic for us because we already pointed out that halacha l'maisa, we do not paskin that way, right? But we paskin that hektish betaos lo havi hektish. Although again we spoke about the beautiful Lublina Rav that hashkafa l'maisa, we paskin hektish betaos havi hektish. But again, the Rush asks over here, I don't understand. What is this Mishnah coming to teach me? He says, ve'im tomar ech bal tana listam ki Beis Shammai. Is the Tana just coming to quote another case according to Beis Shammai, to the Beis Hillel, mi she'eno kidvarav lo havi nazir. You must remember again, according to Beis Hillel, the only people in this Mishnah who will become a nazir are the people whose statements are true. but anyone whose statement turns out to be untrue is not going to be a Nazir. Because remember again, Beis Hillel holds, Hekdish b'tos lo have hekdish. So what's going on over here? He's Tzvi Shlomar, Ashmo'ina namid la Beis Hillel, the Safek Nazir havi, the Kai have Safek chaya, Safek behema, the Safek beria, umachmirim bechumra shnehem, va'asu ba'avra. Supposed to listen to this. According to the Rosh, the Chiddush of the Mishnah is that even Beis Hillel would agree with the conclusion. Remember again, the Mishnah ends off by saying all of these guys in the Mishnah, they're all Nazirim. They're all Nazirim. So according to Beis Shammai, I understand that why, because Hekdish b'ta'os have Hekdish, but according to the Rosh, the Chiddush of the Mishnah, even according to Beis Hillel, they are all going to be Nazirim. They're all Nazirim. Why? Because they're both say a kai is a suffix. We're not sure what to do with a kai. There are three possibilities when it comes to a kai. Either it's a behema, either it's a chaya, or possibility number three, which is it's a birya bifnei atzma. It's its own independent entity. So Beis Hillel says when people make these statements in the Mishnah, it's not clear who's correct. Safek Naziros is going to go l'chumra, says Beis Hillel. Therefore, again, he agrees with the bottom line conclusion, which all nine of these guys are going to be Nazirim. All these guys are going to be Nazirim. Okay, so that's according to the Rosh, the entire Chiddush of the Mishnah. Says the Gemara, Tani Chada, Tisha Nazirim. So we'll say, interesting enough, there are two brises. In one brise it says, that's why I was hearing the echo. Okay, I thought it was the thing. It was this. Sorry. So Tani Chada, Tisha Nazirim. So ultimately, I will say, so one brisa says that when you look at the case in this Mishnah, there are 9 Nazirim. Betanya Idach, Teisha Nazirios. Another version of the brisa says, when looking at the case of this Mishnah, there are 9 durations or 9 terms of Naziros. What does it mean about saying? That the second version of the brisa says one guy is going to be a Nazir for 9 consecutive terms. Says the Gemara, Bishlama Tisha Nazirin, Kigon Dahavi Gavri Tvei, De'itbis Va'azilbei. Shabbos say you could easily go ahead and make this into a case of 9 Nazirim. How do you make it into a case of 9 Nazirim? Just add on more guys to the list. That's not a big deal. If you look at the Rush, again, the Rush says, second wide line, Aval test Naziros Lechad. I'm sorry. The first wide line of the Rush. Bishlama test Nazirin Kigon Dahavi Gabri Tuva Kideparshu Asnisin. I was supposed to say, to tell me that there's a case of 9 Nazirim, in other words, 9 people who all become Nazirim. Okay, that's the case of the Mishnah. That's obvious, right? In other words, guy number 1 says A, guy number 2 says B, guy number C says so on and so forth. And again, according to Beis Shammai, they're all going to be Nazirim because Hekdish B'taos have a Hekdish. According to Beis Hillel, in this case, they're all going to be Nazirim. Ultimately, because a Kai is a Safek Naziris is going to go to Chumrah. But asks the Gemara, Elatation Nazirios Lechad Gavra Hechi Mishkachosla. But I was like, how can you have a situation of one guy having 9 consecutive durations or terms of Naziros? To which the Gemara says, Bishlama Shis Mashkachosla Kidisnan. So we'll say 6 could work, because 6 is the case in the Mishnah. Right? 6 is the case in the Mishnah. Take a look at the Rush again. Aval tes Naziros Chad Gavrech Mishkachos Bishlama Shis right Mishkachos. La Kigon Sha'amar Adam Echad Mehesha Amru Hashisha Shezeh Chaya She'eno Chaya Shezeh Behema She'eno Behema Shul Chaya Ubehema She'eno Chaya Ubehema. Shabbos says, so now listen to this. You could come up with 6. Why come up with the 6? Because there are 6 different formulations in the Mishnah. So you could go ahead and have one guy make all 6 statements. So if one guy makes all 6 statements, I'll say, what has he effectively done? What has he done? He's taken on 6 durations of Naziros. But says the Gemara, says the Gemara, Aval Tlas, back to the Gemara, Aval Tlas, Heichim Mishkachosla. Where did the last 3 come from? To which the Gemara says, Amrav Sheshes Kigon Da'amar, Hareini Nazir, Unaziros Hakol Alai. So I will say, okay, it's actually a pretty simple answer. What does he do? He goes ahead and he says, I am a Nazir, and all of the Nazirus is upon me. Now look at the Rush again. He says, Di'im tes shetfisu kidevarshu asnisin, va'amru echad kol din Nazir shal kul chamalai, nimtzala be'shamai tes Nazir. So also listen to this. So what you could have is, Remember, you could make the Mishnah into 9 different articulations. So essentially, if a guy says, Hareini Nazir, I'm a Nazir, Unaziras hakol alai, and the Nazirus of all those other people is upon me. So essentially, what is he doing in that case? He's taking upon himself what? The Nidre Nazirus vowed by each of those other individuals. Again, when you put that all together, you get 9. Therefore, become a Nazir ultimately again for 9 terms of Nazirus. Incredible. Shabbos say, I'll just point out over here, the Rambam codifies this case in Perek Beis Halacha Yud. And the Rambam writes as follows. He says, now remember, the Rambam Paskins like Beis Hillel, which means what? Hekdish Bitaos Lo Have Hekdish. So therefore, again, I will say, whenever you make a ned in Naziros, and your ned in Naziros that is based on a mistaken premise, you are not a Nazir, right? I will say, so if we go back to the paradigmatic case that we saw in yesterday's Mishnah, right? Because that was really the case we've been talking this entire time, right? There's a group of guys walking. They see someone walking towards them. What happens? The first guy says, I'm a Nazir, if that's Ruvain. Second guy says, I'm a Nazir, if that's not Ruvain, right? So in that case, I will say, the way we paskin halacha l'maisa is the guy who's right is going to be a Nazir. The guy who's wrong, what? Is not a Nazir. I will say, by the way, I'll also point out to you something amazing. The concept of hekdish b'taos lo havi hekdish, I will say, also teaches you a profound yesod, which is, in life, there's right and there's wrong. You know, we live in a society where there's a tremendous infusion of moral equivalency, right? In other words, that we are not allowed to tell anyone that they're wrong, right? Everyone is right. There's just different versions of right, right? And if you feel it, if you this, and what it does is, besides for the moral decay, what it just does is, if there's no objective right or wrong in life, then how does society as a whole find a way to move forward? Then what's the barometer? And you see it. You see it happening today. So it's such an incredible yesod. You know, I will say, so can you imagine, like, if you were to put this case to the societal metric, right? So there's a group of people walking around, right? And there's a guy walking towards them. And the first guy says, I'm a Nazir if it is Ruvain. Second guy says, I'm a Nazir if it's not Ruvain. So, you know, like, societally we say, well, you're both right, right? Because, I don't know, maybe the guy walking towards you, he says he's a Ruvain, right? He feels like a Ruvain, right? So he's got, in other words, so it's just, you know, so it's just, when we interact with people, we have to interact with people, all people with derech eretz. That's not, but a society has to have an intact moral fabric that says certain things are right, certain things are wrong, certain things are tamei, certain things are tahar. Because if you don't have that, then any form of life clarity is absolutely obscured. It's such. So no, you're right, you're wrong. That's it. No, but I want to be right also. I haven't said you want to be right, but you're wrong. But you're wrong. Just because you want to be right, just because you feel you should be right, does not mean you're right. Anyway, so the Rambam Paskins, in this case, I will say over here, so we pass like Beis Shammai, like Beis Hillel, hektish betals, lo have hektish. Now, interestingly enough, in the Kai case, the Rambam Paskins like the Mishnah, right? The Rambam Paskins like the Mishnah, namely, all of these guys are Nazirim. But how does that stem? Because we just said before, the Rambam Paskins like Beis Hillel, that hektish betals lo have hektish. So why in this case, why this should be a case of hektish betals? So we'll say the Rambam writes, very simple, mipnei. So the truth is, we'll say the Rambam has it over here as kvi instead of kai. There are different pronunciations of the word. He has it as kvi. Mimei shakai yesh bo drachim shava b'han lechaya, v'yesh bo drachim shava b'han lebehema, v'yesh bo drachim shava lechaya ulebehema. And therefore, you know, both say, essentially what the Rambam says is what? Is that it's a suffix case. So remember, that's why, as the Rush said already, that's why the Rush was a lead up to this. This is a case of suffix. So I will say, in the previous case, there's no suffix. Why is there no suffix? Either it's Ruvain or it's not Ruvain. Right? There's no suffix. In this case, with the Kai, it's an actual suffix. So therefore, even Beis Hillel would agree that halacha l'maaseh everyone is a Nazir in this case, and that is how the Rambam will say. By the way, The Rambam brings down another case. Listen to this. What's another case like this? Listen to this. The Gemara doesn't quote this, but he says, V'hu adin imra'u androgynous. It's the same case Rabbi said. Let's say a group of people are walking down the street, and they see a person approaching them. First person says, I'm a Nazir if that's a man. Second person says, I'm a Nazir if that's a woman. So we'll say, so we know in halacha androgynous, there's suffix there's suffix relating to that individual. So the Rambam says, halacha l'maisa, what happens in that case? Kulam Nazirin. Right? Everyone is a Nazir. So just pointing out, interestingly enough, so again, we paskin hekdish betaos lo have hekdish. That's what paskin like Beis Hillel. But in a case of what we'll call hekdish besafek, or a case of safek, even Beis Hillel will agree that safek naziros l'chumra, and therefore they're all going to be nazir. Incredible. I will say, if you want to look up that case, that's Hilchos Naziros, Perek Beis Halacha Yud. Great case. And I will say, Hadjur Alach Beishamai, Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov. Okay, next. I will say this is an exciting parak actually, because now we're going to begin to actually get into many of the details regarding the restrictions actually of Naziros. So the Mishnah writes as follows: Shlosha minin asurim benazir. There are three things that a Nazir is prohibited to. What are they? Hatuma, can't become tameh. Taglachos, can't take a haircut. V'hayotze min hagefen, and is prohibited to eat anything that comes from the grape. And I will say three basic restrictions, ultimately again of Naziros. Beautiful. Says the Mishnah. V'chol hayotze min hagefen mitzarfen zeh, bless you. And I will say any part of the grape, right? So let for example, just for example purposes, although we're going to discuss this in just a moment in the Mishnah. So let's say halacha l'maisa, the shear for achila, for a grape, for a Nazir is going to be a kizayis. It's going to be a kizayis. Right? So what we're going to see is that halacha l'maisa, the different parts of the grape have the ability to combine, and ultimately form the requisite shear for prohibition. Ve'in chayav ad sheyochal min ha'novim kizayis, but you're only chayav if you eat a kizayis from the grape. So that's the shear isra, we'll say. Amid days, Mishnah Rishona, Omeres, ad sheyishter revi'es yayin. So we'll say, we're going to talk about this statement in the Gemara, because it's actually quite interesting. Now, Mishnah Rishona, we'll say, means what? An earlier version of the halacha. So an earlier version of the halacha said that when it comes to liquid, right, when it comes to wine, the shear for drinking wine for a Nazir, ultimately again is going to be a revi'us. Now watch this. He says, Rabbi Akiva says, Afilu shara pito bayayin, v'yesh ba kedei l'tzarif kizayis chayiv. So this is actually pretty incredible. Rabbi Akiva says that if you soak. If you soak your bread in wine, ultimately again, so we'll say, and it forms the shear of the kizayis chayiv. Now we'll say, now what's the chiddush over here? The chiddush over here is like this: what combines to form part of the kizayis? The bread. Even though what? The bread is absolutely mutter. So we'll say, we are going to see that this is a concept in halacha of heter mitztaref le'isra, which is really very exciting, right? Very exciting. So in other words, we'll say, so I take bread, I'm a Nazir, I take bread, I dip it in wine. I now eat a kizayis of bread. What's the halacha? I'm in violation of my naziros. But one second, it's quite possible the majority of what I ate was what? Was actual heker, was bread. Nothing wrong with bread. Right? So therefore, halacha l'maisa, Rabbi Akiva says the chiddush over here is the bread combines with the wine to form the requisite shear of kizayis. Incredible. The chayiv al yayin bifnei atzmo, v'al ha'anavim bifnei atzmon, v'al ha'chartzonim bifnei atzmon, v'al ha'zogim bifnei atzmon. Okay, so let's say, so now here we go. Furthermore, says the Gemara, when it comes, so the Mishnah said before that you're chayiv for gefen and kol yotzim and a gefen, anything comes from grapes. So we'll say, what does that include? So number one, it includes wine, right? Grapes, anavim are grapes. Chartzon, and obviously we're going to have machlokes on these terms, but for now, let's define chartzonim as grape skins, right? Zogim as grape seeds. So in other words, you're chayiv for consumption for any part of the grape. So either the wine that comes from the grape, the actual full grape itself, grape skins, or grape seeds. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Omer, Ein chayiv ad sheyochal shnei chartzonim v'zog. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says you only chayiv, we'll say, if you eat 2 grape skins and a seed. That's the shear. Again, we'll discuss the technicalities of all of this. But actually, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is actually basing himself on the pasuk, which we'll discuss. Right? So you have to eat 2 grape skins and a seed. So Elohin Chartzanim, the Elohin Zagin. So we'll say, what are the Chartzanim, what are the Zagin? Ha-Chartzanim Elo Achitzonim. So I will say, Chartzanim, we are now defining as grape skins. Zogim Elo Apnimium. This refers to the grape seeds. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So we'll say, this is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds Chartzanim, grape seeds. Zogin, grape seeds. I'm sorry. Chartzanim, grape skins. Zogim, grape seeds. Rabbi Yossi says he disagrees. He says, Shalotita, Rabbi Yehuda, I think you're wrong. And let me tell you the way to remember what is what. Kizug shel behema. Think about it as a cowbell, right? The bell of an animal. Hachitzon zug v'apnimi inbal. The external part of the bell is called the zug, and the clapper of the bell is called the inbal. So we'll say, now listen to this. So therefore, again, just the machlokes in terms. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda holds that chartzanim are grape skins, zogim are grape seeds. Rabbi Yossi holds zogim are grape skins and chartzanim are grape seeds. Okay, so just a machlokes in terms. Beautiful. Says the Gemara. Here we go. Shlosha mina masurim ben Nazir hatumah. So I will say, so now here's what's interesting. So remember, the Mishnah introduced us to this idea. I will say that Allah Maisa, if you are a Nazir, 3 things are prohibited. Number 1, taglachas, or I should say, number 1, tuma, right, becoming impure. Number 2, taglachas, haircutting. Number 3, the lashon of the Mishnah was yotzei min hagefen, that which comes from the grape. Now remember, just to keep the flow of the Mishnah in mind, the Mishnah then defined what's the definition of that which comes from the grape. Sounds like 4 parts, right? Part 1, the grape. Part 2, grape skins. Part 3, grape seeds. And part 4, wine. Wine, that's what it sounds like. Says the Gemara. Here we go. Hayotzi min ha-gefen in, gefen atzmolo. Ooh, interesting. So I will say, the lashon of the Mishnah is, a Nazir is liable for eating that which comes from the grape. So it sounds like any grape or grape derivatives. Those are the 4 things we just mentioned. What about eating the shoots of the vine itself? Well, say, take a look at the Rush. I'm assuming this is the second line of the Rush for all of us. Right? So Rush, right-hand column, Gefen atzmolo, kigon, olin v'lulavin. So we'll say, what happens if you eat the leaves or the soft shoots? See, the Gemara is not really taking into account actually eating the hardened vines, because b'pashtos, that's not edible. But what about the consumption of the soft leaves or the soft shoots? So I will say, interestingly enough, that comes from the vine, right? That's the vine, but it's not what? It's not what? It's not a grape derivative, right? It's not yotzei min ha-gefen. So the Gemara says the fact that the Mishnah frames the prohibition of the Nazir as referring to that which comes from the grape, which seemed to indicate to us that the consumption of the leaves or the soft shoots you would not be liable for that. Gefen asmolo. So we'll say, Maslisin de lo Rabbi Elazar. Our Mishnah must not reflect the view of Rabbi Elazar. Why not? So listen to this. So we'll say, Rabbi Elazar Omer afilu olin v'lulavin b'mashma. Because we'll say Rabbi Elazar is of the opinion that we'll say not only are you chayiv for gefen and yotzim and gefen, not only are you chayiv for grape derivatives, those 4 things, but you're also chayiv for what? The shoots and the leaves of the vine. Very interesting. Can't even eat the shoots and the leaves of the vine, according to Rabbi Elazar. So the Gemara says, Ikeda Amri, others say, Ikeda Amri la Seifa, Eino chayiv ach yochal min ha'anavim kizayis. So we'll say, others frame this question on the Seifa. What do the Seifa say? You're not chayiv for violation of your neder nazirus until you go ahead and you eat the kizayis from grapes. Min ha'anavim in, so I will say, it sounds like from grapes, yes. Min ha'gefen atzmolo, but from the vines themselves, no. So, once again, my season to look Rabbi Elazar. Our Mishnah does not reflect the view of Rabbi Elazar. The sign of Rabbi Elazar, Omer afilu olin v'lulavin b'mashma. So I will say, so this is item number 1, right? So item number 1, halacha ma'isa is, first machlokes, Mishnah introduces us to the idea that Nazir is chayiv for anything yotzei min ha-gefen. What's included again in yotzei min ha-gefen? We'll call it whole grape, grape skins, grape seeds, wine. right? So now the Gemara says the inference from that is not like Rebbe Lazar, right? Rebbe Lazar holds you chayiv even for eating leaves and soft shoots, soft leaves, soft shoots. So Rebbe say, so clearly again the Mishnah is rejecting that view. So Rebbe say, what we are left with now is a fundamental machlokes, Rebbe Lazar and the Rabbanan. There is a Nazir allowed to eat the leaves and the shoots from a vine or not. Rabbanan, yes. Rebbe Lazar, no. Rebbe say, here we go. This is going to be the rest of the Amud. But my kameflagi. So Rebbe say, what is at the root of this machlokes, Rebbe Lazar and the Rabbanan? Here we go. So Rebbe say, this is great. Rebbe Lazar darshi ribui umeute, Rabbanan darshi klali uprati. So Rebbe say, we're going to see now, actually I haven't had this in a little while, a real good old-fashioned exegetical machlokes, right? What a way to start to be. So Rebbe says, what their machlokes is, how to darshan the pasuk. Remember again, Rebbe say, we've seen many times our journeys in Shas, there's a ribui and a miot, and a klal uprat. Now, interestingly enough, there's a lot of similarities between them as we're going to see, right? A ribui is an expansive or an inclusive phrase. A miot is a limiting one. Klal is a general statement. Prat is a specific statement. But we're going to see that the way you darshan a ribui and a miot and a klal or prat, we know this, are fundamentally different from each other, and as such they yield different halachic results. Now remember, we're going to say they are both legitimate exegetical principles, right? Remember again, we say this every single day in Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Shlosh Midos, had Torah Nidrash Haspohen. There are different. So again, each of these things we're going to see. The Rabbanon and Rebbe Lazar had a different Masorah, had a different tradition from their Rebbeim about how to darshan these respective psukim. So here we go. So the Gemara says like this. Let's analyze. So Rebbe Lazar darshan b'yuti, Rabbanon darshan klal prati. First, start with Rabbi Lazar. Rebbe Lazar darshan ribui b'yuti. So Rebbe Lazar darshans a ribui, which remember again is an inclusive phrase, and a miyut. A limiting phrase. So here we go. Pasuk says, "Miyayin v'sheichar yozir." So we'll say by the Nazir, the Torah says from wine and sheichar, right? From wine. Remember again. Normally wine, right? Yayin is aged wine. Sheichar is new. We're going to discuss these terms, but again, don't think that sheichar means like beer, right? Sheichar in this context means wine. Just different types of wine. So the Nazir can't drink wine. So miyayin sheichar miyat. Niyat, I will say that is a limiting phrase. That's a limiting phrase. Mikol asher ya'asem egefen hayayin. But then the pasuk says he's not allowed to have anything that is produced from the vine, right? Riba, that is a more inclusive phrase. So we'll say, now what do you have? Miyat v'riba. So we'll say in general, when you have a miyot and then a ribui, riba hakol. It comes to include everything. Now what are you coming to? Now when we say include everything, by the way, in this context, it means include everything under the umbrella of prohibition. So what's being included? So riba called my riba. The boss say what's being included? Riba kol mili. It comes to include everything. Everything means what Rabbi was saying. The Pashas, everything means everything that comes from the vine, including what? Including what? Shoots and leaves. Right? My mi'et. Rabbi was saying ultimately again, what is it coming to exclude? Mi'et shabishta. I will say, what is it coming to exclude? Now, the Rush over here says Shabishta means Zmuros. It means the actual vines themselves. In other words, the hardened vines, which everyone will agree are what? Are not edible. So I will say, so this is the drush of Rabbi Eliezer. It's very simple. It's a miut and a ribui. Ultimately, whenever you have a miut and a ribui, riba hakol, what does it come to include? Anything edible that comes from the vine. So that's all four parts of the grape, or all four components of the grape. Right? Remember, grapes, grape skins, grape seeds, wine, and the ribui comes to teach you that what? Even the leaves and the shoots. What does it come to exclude? Exclude the vine itself, the hardened vine itself. For Rabbanan Darshi, klali uprati. The Rabbanan Darshi, on the other hand, klali uprat. Well, here we go. Miyayin v'sheichar yazir prat. Pasuk says he can't drink wine and sheichar. That's a prat, right? They both say, right? That is a specific. But then the pasuk says from anything that is made from the vine, klal. That's an inclusive, right? That's a general statement. Mecharsonim va'ad zag. But you know, both say. Then it says, let's define from grape skins to grape seeds. So what happened? Chazar uprat. We'll say that's another limiting, that's another specific statement. So what do you have over here? Prat, uklal, uprat. So we'll say, what do you do when you have a prat, uklal, uprat? Ein atodon ela ke'ein haprat. So we'll say, the exegetical rule is that when you have a klal, uprat, uklal, ultimately again, so we'll say, so everything is seen through the lens of the prat. Ma prat mufurash pri, upsoles pri. So we'll say, just like the prat, right? In this case over here is a fruit. And I will say, the term psoles pri is interesting. Psoles here we'll say means psoles literally means what? Right? Psoles means like the garbage, right? The inferior stuff. We're going to see what it means. So just like the prat refers to the pri and the inferior part of the pri, af kol pri upsoles pri. I will say, by the way, we're going to see what's the psoles of grapes? Vinegar. So we are going to see, I will say that a Nazir, interesting enough, what Rabbanan are going to learn out from their klal, uprat to klal, is an interesting, I should say, just the opposite. It's a prat, uklal, uprat. What they are going to learn ultimately is it's a grape and any grape derivative, and the chiddush is even that which is the psoles of the grape, even that which is the inferior output of the grape, which is going to be vinegar, a Nazir is not permitted to partake of as well. Very interesting. So the Gemara says, "Ima prat mefurash." So we'll say, so therefore, here it is. The fundamental machlokes between Rabbi Lazar and the Rabbanon about whether or not a Nazir is permitted to go ahead and eat the leaves and the soft shoots of a vine is dependent on how you darshan these psukim. Rabbi Lazar is darshaning it ultimately again as a riboy and a miut. And therefore, from his conclusion, riboy and miut tells us that Allah Lamaisa Nazir is not allowed to eat. A Nazir is not allowed to eat the leaves and the shoots. Again, what is he technically allowed to eat? I don't know, for what is there no prohibition? The actual vines themselves, the hardened vines, which, okay, they're not edible. The Rabbanan darshan prat, uklal, uprat, and therefore their conclusion is a Nazir is allowed to eat the leaves and the shoots. What can't he eat? Any type of grape or grape derivative, including vinegar. Good. Says the Gemara, but 1 second, asking the Rabbanon, Ima prat mafurash pri gomer, af kol pri gomer. But 1 second, why is it going to the Rabbanon? Just like the prat refers to a fully finished grape, fully finished pri. Maybe ultimately, again, the prohibition should only be on a fully finished pri. Im kain maniach l'cha kasa mashmo shelo amru. So we'll say, if that's the case, we'll say, the whole chab of these exegetical principles is to do what? Is to learn out additional items more than that's written in the pasuk, right? And that's the whole point of these exegetical principles. You apply them, and it provides you with additional new information. So we'll say if that's the case, that all we're coming to include is a pre-gomer, then ultimately, again, what more is to be learned that wasn't already stated in the pasuk? Rather says the Gemara, because remember again, fresh grapes, dried grapes are already included. To which the Gemara says, Yayin v'chometz haksivi, wine and vinegar already written. Ha'ein alecha lodun kilashon acharon ela kilashon rishon. Rather, I will say it must be that halacha l'maisa, we can darshan like the last lashon, but rather we have to go ahead and darshan like the first lashon of the prat, namely that the prat ultimately again is not necessarily pre-gomer, a finished pre, rather a pre-stam, just a regular pre. So the Gemara says, called Davar, if at the end they were going to include everything, so ma Talmud lomar mechartsonim va'adzag. So then why does the pasuk need to say the phrase from the grape skins to the grape seeds? Lomar lecha, to teach us, or we'll say what? Komakom sha'ata motze prat uklal, wherever you find a mosai, the concept of a prat or a klal, namely a specific and then a general statement. You cannot darshan everything through the lens of the prat. Ella naase klal mosaf ala prat. Rather, I will say what's happening over here is the klal itself is coming to add on to the prat. We'll say first white line Allah medalad amadays achi yifrot lecha kasav kider sheparat lecha benazir, until the pasuk itself comes actually to teach you like it did by Nazir. Fine. Amar mar ma prat mafurash pri upsolas pri Af kol pri upsolas pri. So we said before, remember again, the klal of the Rabbanon, that just like ultimately again, the prat includes pri, the fruit, and psolas pri, the psolas, right? What did I say? What was the word I used before? The inferior, thank you. The inferior part of the pri, all right? Or the decayed part of the pri. Af kol pri upsolas pri. Says the Gemara, by the way, what does this refer to? Pri, envy. So the pri, of course, refers to grapes. Psolas pri mahi. They will say, what's psolas pri? Chometz. That's the vinegar. Af kol pri mahi. So we'll say, when we say now, the pasuk comes to teach me pri and psolas pri, and the drasha comes to teach me every other fruit. So we'll say, once you have grapes and once you have vinegar, that they're both permitted to a Nazir, what else are you coming to include? So it's very interesting. Gur haki. So we'll say, what's gur haki? So gur haki, I will say, the Rush points out, are grapes that have not matured. Grapes that are not matured. Gur haki. So we'll say, halacha l'maisa, that's included as well. That halacha l'maisa, those are prohibited to the Nazir as well. Af kol de psolas pri mahi. So we'll say, ultimately again, so when it says, even every other form of inferior pri, what is that coming to include? Mahi, Rav Kahana, la suye. Now, by the way, when we say grapes that haven't, when we say grapes that halacha l'maisa haven't been harvested, what it also meaning immature grapes. Immature, you know those grapes that just can't get their act together, right? So the immature, in other words, they haven't been harvested. They're on the tree. They're immature grapes. So those are also included in the prohibition of Nazir. So the Gemara says, Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana says it also comes to include something else. La suye invi dichrin, wormy grapes. Wormy grapes, right? In other words, worm-infested grapes. So I will say, even if a Nazir were to eat those, halacha l'maisa, he would be chayiv for violation of his naziros. The ad zag, I will say, when we say that again, remember, it comes to include the grape skins up until the grape seeds. Amravina la suye de bein habeinayim. So I will say, interesting, what's bein habeinayim? So this is actually very interesting. These are grapes, I will say, you see this sometimes on a cluster of grapes, where you could have some smaller grapes that are nestled inside the cluster. So often what ends up happening is these grapes don't develop like the others. Right? Why? Because again, since they're on the inside of the cluster, they don't get the same sunlight. So we'll say, so again, the Gemara is suggesting that Joshua would tell us, even those type of underdeveloped, inner cluster grapes are also, if the Nazir eats them, he's also going to be higher for those. V'yad zag, Amar, Ima prat mufurash pri gomer, I've called pre-gomer. So we'll say, maybe we should say it's just like the prat. Just like the prat. So we'll say, if you look at it, both the Rush and Rashi, if you look at the Rush, it's the last Rush on the page, Beina Beinayim, Perisha Beinatam, Anavim Kitanim Sha'omdim Beinagdolim. These are the small grapes that are nestled there in the middle between the larger grapes. He says, Ve'inam ru'uyim la'achila. They're not fit for consumption. Ultimately, again, I will say, so it's because they're nestled inside of the cluster. Ultimately, again, they don't get to see the sun, and therefore they don't do it. I will say, the thing about it, I found this imagery very striking. It's sometimes like a good metaphor for family dynamics as well. You have a family, you have a cluster, and there are some members of the cluster that are assertive, that are great, they're all doing fine, they're getting the necessary sunlight, the necessary attention. And then what happens? Sometimes you have the members of the family that are kind of pushed between the other grapes, right? In other words, they're there, and they're part of the cluster, but they're never really on the exterior. They're always just on the interior. And I would say it's so important in family dynamics to be attentive to the smaller grapes. Because the smaller grapes are never going to push themselves out to the front, right? The smaller grapes are never going to go ahead and clamor for the spotlight. And the smaller grapes sometimes won't even necessarily tell you when something is wrong. Sometimes what just ends up happening with the smaller grapes in the family dynamic is they kind of just recede to the interior a little bit. But what ends up happening is, overall, right, and over time, their growth is stunted, right? Because they don't get the same attention. They don't get the same love. They don't get the same sun as everyone else. And so you have to be, in a family, you have to be attentive to your cluster to make sure that every single grape is getting exactly what it needs in order to fully self-actualize and mature in a healthy way. All from a riboy namiyut. Incredible. So let's go back. Let's finish this up. Says the Gemara. Azag Amar Rabina Lasui Divina Bina. Fine. Amar Mar. Ima prat mafurash pre-gummer afkol pre-gummer. So we said before, just like the prat refers to a pre-gummer, so to every pre-gummer. So Amrit imkain maniach hakasav mashmo shelo amru. So we'll say if that's the case, then what is it that's being taught to us that the pasuk itself did not already convey? To which the Gemara says, shelo amru anavim. So the Gemara says, shelo amru anavim lachim yivishma ksivi. Pasuk already says, right, fresh grapes, dry grapes. Yain b'chometz, wine and vinegar. Pasuk says, ha'in alecha ladun kalashon achron ele kalashon rishon. And the say what it tells you is you cannot go with the last lashon, rather you have to go with the early lashon, namely that it's not referring to pre-gummer, rather it's referring to pre-stam. And what's the case there? Me'achar shesafenu l'rabos kol davar ma TALMUD lomar. So we'll say if we're going to include everything as a result of the drasha, then ultimately, again, what is the exegetical principle helping us learn? What is coming to teach us when it adds in the phrase anytime generally you find the prat uklal, so we'll say in general, you don't darshan everything through the lens of the prat. Ella naase mosaf ala prat. Rather, I will say what it says is that Allah in general, when you have a prat to klal, I will say, so ultimately we do not look at the principle through the lens of the prat. Rather, ultimately, again, we see the klal as adding on to the prat. Ad sheyifrat l'cha kasav top of lamed hey kederach sheparat l'cha ben Nazir. But I will say ultimately again until unless of course you have a specific exception as we happen to have in the case of Nazir. So I will say what we are left with effectively in this case, I will say is what? Is halacha l'maisa. Remember, let's just not lose track of where we were. Right? What do we have? We have a Mishnah teaching us that halacha l'maisa Nazir is usher in 4 things. What are the 4 things? Number one, tumah. Number 2, tagla. 3 things. Number 2, taglachas. Number 3, remember again, the lashon over here was hayotze min hagefen. Mishnah then went on to say, what is yotze min hagefen? What does that refer to? Number 1, grapes. Number 2, grape skins. Number 3, grape seeds. Number 4, wine. What does the Gemara infer from our Mishnah? What's not included in the prohibition of the Nazir? What's not included? Leaves and shoots. Rejecting the opinion of Rabbi Elazar. To which the Gemara says, this is machlokes. Rabbi Elazar says, Nazir can't eat leaves and shoots. Chachamim say they can. What's the basis of machlokes? It's an exegetical machlokes. Right? Rabbi Elazar darshans ribui and miut. The Rabbanon are darshaning ultimately again a klal or prat, or really a prat uklal. And I will say all we're doing is going through again the actual drashas which we did, and then again after that we got into this discussion. We're branching out in that discussion as well. So I will say we have not resolved this machlokes. We know what our Mishnah holds, but we do not know yet what the halacha l'mais is. We'll stop over here for today, and then we'll say let's do a few minutes of Mesilas Yesharim together.